So the world was seeing on their TV screens, you know, the local police force in Northern Ireland beating the protesters, stones being thrown, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, I suppose, and led to the real beginning of a conflict in Northern Ireland. Yeah, and so as a result of the Battle of the Bogside, the British Army were sent over to patrol the streets of Belfast and Derry predominantly, because the RUC, local police force, couldn't handle or cope anymore. So the British Army were sent over along with the establishment of a defence regiment in Northern Ireland called the UDR, Ulster Defence Regiment. Now initially, the British Army, even by the Catholics, who, you know, considered themselves Irish, they welcomed the British Army. They thought they'd be a little bit more neutral than the, as they seen, biased RUC, having a 90% Protestant ratio. Initially they were welcomed. There's video footage of, you know, Catholics, you know, the men and women giving sandwiches and cups of tea to the army. But that soon started to turn sour, very much so. So what would have led to that, the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will, was something called internment without trial, which was something that was initiated by the British, where if there was a Catholic member of the community even suspected of having an association with the IRA, they were imprisoned. No trial, no nothing, throw away the key. The Catholic people went to the streets, and on the 30th of January 1972, so happened probably one of the most infamous incidents in the Troubles history, something called Bloody Sunday. That was when 14 Catholic people were gunned down by the British Army. It led to unforeseen tension. You know, so much so that 1972 went down as the bloodiest year of the Troubles. 479 people lost their lives during that year. And this also, you know, around this time was when the likes of the Provisional IRA started to assemble and really start to move into gear. On the Unionist side, there were groups like the Ulster Volunteer Force, or the UVF, and there's also the UDA, Ulster Defence Association. So both opposites, you know, the IRA were the terrorist organisation on the Catholic Irish side, and then also the UVF, UDA would have been groups on the Protestant British Unionist side. But in 1973, something had to change, something had to give. So there was an agreement in Northern Ireland brought about called the Sunningdale Agreement, and that was where it was thought that the compromise was nationalists and loyalists could power share in a government in Northern Ireland. But this was very much strictly opposed by the Unionists. There was a man called Reverend Ian Paisley, very, very famous or infamous character in the history of the Troubles. You should do more, you know, research on him. Unforgettable character. He was like the voice, the real hardcore voice of unionism at the time. Unionism, by the way, means you're a believer in the union of the United Kingdom. You believe in Northern Ireland remaining part of Great Britain. So the Sunningdale Agreement was not agreed on the Unionist side, but the mid-1970s was the scene of much bloodshed during the course of the Troubles. The IRA decided to take their bombing campaign over to England. The cities of Birmingham and Guildford recorded many, many deaths due to IRA bombings. As retaliation for this, the UVF set off bombs in Dublin City and also the border county of Monaghan, which is in the Republic of Ireland. This was in 1974, and 34 people lost their lives between Dublin and Monaghan. 9 people were killed in Monaghan, so 25 in Dublin. So it became known as what was called a tit for tat war. One side would carry out an atrocity and then the other side would retaliate. And remember guys, 3,500 people were killed in this conflict. I can't talk about every single incident that happened because we'd be here until another few years at least. The 1970s definitely saw some of the most infamous incidents of the Troubles. You know, the Dublin bombings was called the Miami Show Band Massacre, where an Irish band who were from Dublin and then also Northern Ireland were playing a concert in Northern Ireland. Their van was attacked. They were killed by the side of the road. So that became known as the Miami Show Band Massacre. There's actually a documentary about it on Netflix. Strongly urge that you watch it. And then in the late 1970s, the IRA blew up a boat in the Republic of Ireland in a place called Sligo. And on board was a man called Lord Louis Mountbatten, who was the Queen's cousin, Queen Elizabeth II's cousin. So this constant tit for tat went on in the 1970s. Leading into the 1980s, it was a little bit different. The tactics tactics, if you want to usually call it that. And there's a change of leadership in the IRA. A man called Rory O'Brady went, and then a man called Gerry Adams, a younger man who was from Belfast, joined, and he became the leader of IRA. The tactic was that he would bring about something called the Long War, which meant it would be a guerrilla warfare which would be sustained over a long period of time, and it would just make the British submit, I suppose. It would just they'd be just worn down mentally, physically, everything, the whole lot, into a point where they have no surrender but to offer a united Ireland, or no choice, should I say. That was the tactic for the 1980s. As well as that, a political party called Sinn Féin became the unofficial political wing of the IRA, if you like. So the thought was that if, one day Gerry Adams had to go around the negotiating table, that there would be a political party, i.e. Sinn Féin, to fall back on. Another time during the Troubles that was mentioned to me in comment sections and previous history videos was the hunger strikes. The hunger strike was a period of time in the Troubles in Northern Ireland. It wasn't just Catholic prisoners, there was also loyalist prisoners held in this prison complex called the Maze, and it became infamous for these buildings that were shaped like the letter H, and they became known as the H blocks. And inside these H blocks there was what was called the hunger strikes, which started in 1981, the year that I was born. And why these strikes happened was, these hunger strikes, prisoners inside the H blocks lost their prisoner of war status, so they weren't granted, special status above ordinary prisoners, shall we say. And as a form of protest, they decided to start starving themselves from early 1981. 10 hunger strikers, all from the IRA, lost their lives over these few months, including probably the most famous member of the hunger strike. It was a man called Bobby Sands, and he won a parliamentary seat, or an MP. He was elected in a by-election in Northern Ireland in the early 1980s. And I suppose that was shown to be a sign of power, or not even a sign of power, but a sign of, letting the British government know that the Catholics had the numbers if they needed to send over anybody to London and, become part of some sort of a political process. But Bobby Sands really became the, sounds like a horrible phrase, but he became the poster boy, or the representative, the pin-up for these hunger strikes. He almost became, he became a martyr for the cause. They all did, definitely. But Bobby Sands, definitely, his name has gone down as the most famous. But after that, during the 1980s, both sides, the UVF, UDA, and then also the IRA, it wasn't as bloody as the 1970s. There was still hundreds of people lost their lives, but it wasn't, as high a ratio as the 1970s. There's many reasons for that, but one of the main reasons, at least on the side of the IRA, is that there was talk of people known as touts. And what that means is that there was talk of internal spies, or even people working for the British government that could have been involved with the IRA for years in terms of recruiting, etc. There's just a feeling of paranoia within the ranks was starting to break out in the 1980s, not knowing who to trust. But if we go into the 1990s, that's when things were starting to change. In 1994, the IRA announced a ceasefire. They announced a complete cessation of violence. The British government weren't too happy about this because they wanted the wording to be changed to permanent cessation of violence. But nonetheless, UVF, UDA soon followed suit, and there was a ceasefire announced for the first time, properly in just over 25 years in Northern Ireland. The conflict began in 1968-69 thereabouts, with the civil rights demonstrations and the Battle of the Bogside, leading through the dark days of the 70s and the 80s, and now leading up until 1994 when Gerry Adams was the president of Sinn Féin. Unfortunately, it wasn't a happy ending. It wasn't a case of a ceasefire and everybody just went home and lived a new life. There was a split in the IRA. There was members of the IRA who wanted to continue the armed struggle to bring about a united Ireland via the gun. And then there was also a strand who wanted to, by peaceful means, by political means. So, naturally enough, with a divide, there's going to be people setting plans and setting ideas elsewhere. And in 1996, there was a bombing in London, the financial district known as Canary Wharf. A bombing went off, a number of people were killed, and the IRA claimed responsibility, basically letting the world know that they hadn't gone away. But, soon after that, again, early 1997, there was talks happening on both sides. Ireland at that time, the Republic of Ireland, our Taoiseach, our Prime Minister, was a man called Bertie Ahern. Over in England, they had Tony Blair, who was the leader of the Labour Party, or as New Labour as they became known, and they set the wheels in motion to get around the negotiating table alongside people from the Protestant unionist community, like Reverend Ian Paisley, David Trimble. On the nationalist Irish side, Catholic side, there was people like Gerry Adams, Martin McGuinness, two sides who said they'd never be on the same table as each other, and here they were at the later part of the 1990s trying to bring these conflicts once and for all to an end. And I suppose it did work out in the end. Something in 1998 was signed called the Good Friday Agreement, and where Sunningdale had failed in 1973 in terms of a power-sharing idea, it worked this time. The men of the gun realised that they weren't going to win this way, so it had to be around the negotiating table. So the Good Friday Agreement of 1998 was signed, in which nationalists and unionists would have equal power sharing in a government in Northern Ireland, which is in a location called Stormont. Okay, now since 1998 there has been relative peace, but that is not to say that that was the end of the violence. A few months after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, there was a bomb blast in the market town of Omagh in Northern Ireland, and that killed 29 people, Catholic, Protestant. There was some teenage Spanish students who were visiting Northern Ireland for a month or two, and they were also killed in the explosion. A group called the Real IRA claimed responsibility. They called themselves the Real IRA because they considered that they were the group to really carry on the traditions, if you will, of the IRA of getting what they wanted via the gun. I remember the incident very, very well. Unfortunately, I remember, if you guys remember, if you're old enough to remember, something like teletext, where you check the news on the TV. I always remember there was, I checked the news one Saturday and it was said 7 people killed in Omagh, 12 people killed, 7. It just went up and up and up throughout the course of the day. Really, really terrible time. But that was the incident. If any good could come out of such a disgusting incident, regardless of your political stance, if you were hardline for United Ireland, if you were hardline for anything else, Northern Ireland remaining part of the United Kingdom, and that was the incident that disgusted absolutely everybody. And thankfully, that's been the last terrorist incident to have happened in Northern Ireland up until now, relatively, in 2020. So there you go, guys. I mean, I can remember from the age of 6 years old, and there was a bombing called the Enniskillen bombing where 12 old age pensioners were bombed. I can remember the Canary Wharf incident. There was a bombing in a place called Warrington in England as well. I can remember even some Sundays as a kid, you would see police with Uzis. There's machine guns, and they would pull over any car with a yellow coloured registration. In the Republic of Ireland, our registration plates are blue, white and black, whereas in Northern Ireland, they'd be yellow. So I'd always see cars with a yellow registration plate as a kid being pulled over to the side of the road, maybe asked questions, etc. Same way cars going up to Northern Ireland from the Republic would have been pulled over. But leading up now, up until 2020, the way Northern Ireland is, it has what's called the Northern Irish Assembly, which is supposed to be sitting at Stormont, which is the government headquarters. For a few years, there was no government in Northern Ireland. There was a fallout for all sorts of reasons. But recently, with coronavirus and the crisis we have at the moment in the world, some sort of a provisional government there has got together to, work out arrangements health-wise, etc. And things have changed a lot socially there as well. The unionists would have been deemed for many years, a lot more hardcore or conservative in their religious beliefs. They would have been very anti-gay marriage, for example. Here in the Republic of Ireland, we were the first country in the world to bring about gay marriage by means of a public referendum. That kick-started a revival of interest in that in Northern Ireland amongst predominantly young people there, a lot of whom weren't even born when the Troubles were at their peak or when the Good Friday Agreement happened in 1998. Gay marriage is now legal in Northern Ireland, so things have changed up there. The first minister, the main minister in charge of political life in Northern Ireland, her name is Arlene Foster, and she's from the DUP, the Democratic Unionist Party. On the nationalist side, there is Sinn Féin, whom Gerry Adams was once the president of. Mary Lou MacDonald is now the president there. Mary Lou MacDonald is more involved with relations down here in the Republic of Ireland. But fulfilling the major, or the main Sinn Féin role in Northern Ireland is a woman called Michelle O'Neill, who is the Deputy First Minister. So you have Arlene Foster as the First Minister from the Unionist Party, and then you have Michelle O'Neill as the Deputy First Minister on the nationalist Irish side. So my friends, that about wraps it up. You know, if you're ever talking to anybody from Ireland, don't assume that we can all talk about what happened in Northern Ireland for a few reasons. Historically, some people don't have an interest. Secondly, a lot of people from the Republic of Ireland, not all, it was an alien concept, as I pointed out earlier on. Northern Ireland, it might as well have been on Mars or Jupiter. It happened on the island of Ireland, but I'm just very lucky that I have an interest in history, in particular Irish history, that I can try and explain it as easy as I can for you guys. There is lots and lots of footage on YouTube. Go do your own research, make up your own mind. I suppose I just have the advantage that I am old enough to remember. In my job as a tour guide, I have to regularly travel to Northern Ireland, and there's people from both sides, and they're nothing but nice to me. Might just get mocked for my accent because I'm from Dublin. But anyway, I better go. I hope you guys learned something new. If you've any more questions, let me know in the comments down below. I've been Ross. This has been my talk on the troubles in Northern Ireland, or at least my take from what I can do today. So thanks very much, guys. Thanks for checking in.